So, since y'all hoes so worried about it, yes, this Tory shot me. You shot me. And you got your publicists and your people going to these blogs lying and shit. Stop lying.
It's day one of the Tory Lanez trial for the shooting of Meghann the Stallion. Law&Crime senior reporter Meghann Cunniff, who was in the courtroom, recaps the top moments. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. All right, let's head over to Los Angeles for a recap of day one of the Meghann the Stallion shooting trial. I'm talking about rapper Tory Lanez, who's accused of firing 5 rounds at the musician after she allegedly insulted him. Now, prosecutors say this resulted in bullet fragments being lodged in her feet. This alleged altercation happened back on July 12th, 2020, after a pool party at the Hollywood Hills home of Kylie Jenner. Lanez is charged with assault with a semi-automatic firearm, personal use of a firearm, and intentional discharge of a firearm. But actually last week, prosecutors added an additional third charge of negligent discharge of a firearm. It's essentially an alternative to the assault charge. And I should mention that Mr. Lanez faces a maximum of nearly 23 years in prison if convicted. So let's go over the key moments from day one. And joining me is someone who was in that courtroom, Law&Crime senior reporter on the West Coast. I should call her Meghann the reporter, Meghann Cunniff. Good to see you, Meghann. Thanks for coming on Sidebar.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
First, let's just talk real quick about what the scene was like before we even talk about some of the key moments, because I heard it was a packed courtroom. There are a lot of people who are interested in this case. What's the scene like there?
Definitely. It was a very packed courtroom. There was a regular group of courthouse reporters there, but then there really is a large contingency of music journalists and hip hop enthusiasts and people who write for hip hop websites and have really been tracking this case forever. And I thought it was remarkable because, I mean, it's a great trial. It was really interesting. I went in there being a little unfamiliar with all the details of the case, but I was really interested to hear it all and see the attorneys. But I really got the impression that everyone around me was just hanging on everyone's word in this trial. I mean, it's everything that's said and everything that's presented in the trial is so important to the people who have been tracking this forever. And it really kind of reiterated just how sacred our judicial system is and in the jury trial system and how important it is for people in disputes to have a courtroom like this to kind of settle things.
Yeah, absolutely, especially since we're not entirely sure what happened. You mentioned words. So one of the key moments from day one is the prosecution's opening statement. What were the first 2 words that the prosecutor used to explain what happened that day?
Dance, bitch. The prosecutor looked right at the jury and he said, dance, bitch. He said those were the words that the defendant said as he fired 5 rounds from a semi-automatic handgun at the victim.
I do want to get into a little bit of the prosecution, what they said they were going to present, right? There's Tory's recorded phone call from jail. There are these text messages. What did the prosecution lay out that they say this is why Tory is guilty of what he did, allegedly did?
Yeah, the prosecutor had a PowerPoint during his opening that really walked through the jurors through some key evidence. They had body camera footage of the police pulling the car over at gunpoint. And then they had the phone call that Tory made to Kelsey Harris from jail where he's apologizing. He doesn't actually say what he's apologizing for, but he repeatedly says that he was just so drunk and that this never would have happened if he hadn't been so drunk. And then they also have text messages that he sent Meghann hours later after he got out of jail saying, you know, Meg, I'm sorry. But again, he doesn't actually say what he's sorry for in there. So Tory's lawyer was able to say that he wasn't apologizing for the shooting. He was apologizing for causing the situation that led to the shooting, which is some kind of love triangle jealousy thing between the 2 women, Tory's lawyer says.
Yeah, I want to get into that in a second before the defense. Just focusing on the prosecution for a second, we did hear some other witnesses. We heard some first witnesses and the 911 phone calls from after the gunshots were fired. What was the impact of that in the courtroom? Because I think that's a probably notable moment, the first presentation of evidence.
Yeah, the first witness really set the scene for them. He wasn't the most compelling, commanding witness in the courtroom, but he had the facts of just responding to the shooting scene that night, and he went around and looked at the scene and took pictures of evidence, and he found 4 spent shell casings. He found a gold chain and a pendant that looked detached from each other, and he also found an acrylic nail, a loose acrylic nail. So there were photos of all those shown to the jury and then actually entered as evidence. So that kind of set the stage for here's the scene of the shooting, and then they move into the traffic stop, and then they talk to the detective about the jail phone call that Tory made. So they really were able to get a lot of the basic evidence in to kind of set up the stage for what happened here.
How graphic were those 911 phone calls?
The 911 calls weren't very graphic. The neighbors sound concerned, but they're reporting gunshots, and they just say that they heard gunfire. And one call kind of had the courtroom laughing because she really didn't want to give her name, and she was just kind of funny in how she said, she definitely knows what gunshots sound like, but she doesn't want the police coming to her home and that kind of thing. But it really just established that this was a loud thing that happened. And somebody even said, it sounds like a woman is being hurt and there's some kind of domestic violence thing. So it was good for prosecutors to just get it out there what happened there.
Moving on to the defense, they presented an opening statement. What's their main argument? Why are they saying that this is not a case of as simple as shut as the prosecution's making it, that there's more to the story? What was their main argument?
So Tory's lawyers' first words to the jury were jealousy. He said, "This is about jealousy, ladies and gentlemen." He said, "It's really going to come down to what led up to them getting into the Escalade, and then why did Meghann want to flee the vehicle?" And he said that he has a key witness who's a neighbor who was in that area and heard all the noise and came out on his balcony. And he said that he's going to testify to seeing Kelsey, somebody who was in the position in the car where Kelsey would have been, actually exit the vehicle and go up to the front passenger seat where Meghann would have been and start fighting. He saw a fight between two women, which is supporting Tory's argument that he wasn't the shooter. It was actually Kelsey who shot Meghann.
See, that's what's so interesting. It's a lot of this is going to revolve around the testimony of Meghann the Stallion, who is going to take the stand. And correct me if I'm wrong, but during day one, the prosecutor acknowledged that Tory and Meghann, they had been intimate before, they'd had sex. When, if I recall correctly, and I think the defense brought this up, Meghann had told CBS's Gayle King that they never had sex. So if that's a case where she wasn't telling the truth about that, and we know her credibility is going to come into question, because isn't it also true that she wasn't entirely forthcoming about how she got the injuries to her foot? She first said it was glass, then acknowledged that it was gunshots. Did you get the sense from day one that Megann's credibility is going to be a big issue for the prosecution?
Absolutely. And Tory's lawyer has been really upfront that he's going to be questioning Meghann about her inconsistent statements and really trying to drive home that she's, changed her story on this a lot. But I think that there's going to be a fine line between how aggressive he can be and whether he kind of skirts into an area of an older man pressing a 27-year-old woman about her sex life on the witness stand. I mean, I think there's a chance that it's not going to come across very well for jurors, that it seems like the kind of defense that looks really good in the tabloids and it's kind of driven for the headlines and the media experience. But when it actually plays out in front of 12 people who aren't invested in the case, I think it's going to be very difficult for him to cross-examine Meghann like that. But he's obviously prepared. I mean, I think if anyone understands the difficult line he's got to walk, it's Tory's lawyer when he does the cross. So it'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah, I think this is a fascinating case. I'm really curious to see where it goes. It doesn't seem so simple, doesn't seem so open and shut. I think the defense has some good arguments. I think the prosecution has some strong arguments. So Meghann the reporter, Meghann Cunniff, I can't wait for you to continue reporting on this. And thanks for taking the time to come on Sidebar.
Thanks so much for having me.
And that's all we have for you here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.